So now we're going to have a look at our method of retrieving data, and this is going to be built up of two components. So we're going to have our query and our query handler. And we're going to start with a query. And what our query is, it's like a request for data of the information from the database. So it doesn't change the state of the system, but it still retrieves the data. And we're going to use that in an example here of an employee list. So what we're first going to do, we are going to go to our query folder here, and we're going to add from our template a new query. So we use the query namespace so we know it's a query, and we like to include list in there as well so that we can differentiate between a view page of a specific employee and a list of multiple employees. And the first thing we're going to do, we are going to inherit the interface of our query. And we need an out here. And what our return value is going to be is a query list result. And our query list result functions very similarly to a list, but it has some bonus parameters. So we can go into it here and we can see we have the item list, which is the information that we're going to be returning. Our count is going to be the count of this information. And we have our offset and fetch size, and this allows for more precise return values in our query. And we're going to move on to this a little bit more later. And what do we want to return? Well, we could return our straight reporting from the table, but we prefer to do it through a model. This way we don't accidentally modify any information inside the database. We can have a model and we can modify this any way we want without having any risk. So what I'm going to do is create a model here in my query results folder. I'm going to call it employee info summary. I'm calling it summary because it's not going to be every single bit of information about the employee. It's purely just the information that we want to display on the list. So I'm going to paste some information across here and we can have a look. I'm only going to be using 4 fields that are going to be displayed on the list, as well as an identifier here, which is going to be the employee ID. So you can see these 4 are going to be displayed on the list. And then the employee ID is our way of identifying the employee. So each row has its own identifier. And this is all we need to do for our model. It's very simple. And we'll be returning a query list result of our model. Now we can set our parameters. This can be more complex, but we're going to be using quite a basic example in this scenario because we don't have a lot of information in our demo database. So we're just going to be using first off, a base search criteria, and this links in with the query list result. So what our base search criteria contains is our fetch size, an offset, a search string, a sort by, and a sort descending. So our fetch size and offset is as it sounds. Our search string is when you want to add a search feature to your grid, which we're going to be looking at later. We're able to use the search string here in our base search criteria, as well as our sort by and our sort descending. So this is when we click on the columns and we can have the columns switch in terms of which way they're descending. And we prefer to use our base search criteria fetch size default as 50 and our offset is 0, but this can be edited however we like. So these are just the default values. So we're going to be having our search criteria here, and we're going to initialize the constructor. And this is all that we're going to be having in our query. You can add more stuff. For example, maybe you want to reuse this query for multiple lists, but you want each list to display different information. We could have for example, a department ID. And this could be used when we call the query as a parameter. So we just receive or return the data just for this department. But for this example, we're going to keep it simple. And this is all we need for our query. So we're going to move on to our query handler. So I'll go into my query handler folder and just add the namespace handler onto the end of this. And what our query handler is going to do, it's the component responsible for executing the query that we just created. So it processes the query to return the requested data from the system's data stores. So what's the first thing we need to do? We want to inherit the interface of our handle query. And you can see here that we have 3 different options. We can handle query, query async, or query async enumerable. This is just going to be a basic example, so I'm going to be non-async for now. And we need an in and we need an out. And our in this case, is going to be our query. And our out is going to be the query list result of our model that we just created. So here we go. We have our base handler, and I'm going to implement the missing members here, which is only going to be 1. This is going to be our handle. Now we want to retrieve our employees from the database. So to do this, I'm going to need to initialize my constructor for the entity repository just so we can retrieve the data from the database. And for my employees, I'm going to make a new variable called employees, entity repository, and we're going to use the find top function. And we'll see why in a second. I'm just going to have this retrieve from the employee reporting, which is the table that we want to retrieve this from. Now, what do we have in our find top? So we have 4 parameters. We have a filter, we have our order by, we have our fetch size, which the default is 200, and we have our offset, which the default is 0. So in this case, like we spoke about, we just want to retrieve all the employees that we have in the table. So we're going to have no filter. Our offset, our order by, we're going to have, let's order by first name. So now it will just retrieve all the results and order them by the first name. Our offset, or this will be our fetch size. We are going to use our search criteria inside our query and use our fetch size, and likewise with the offset. So as you can see, we can, just when we retrieve our reportings, we can already have declared our fetch size and offset before we've actually called this query. And likewise for the count, I'm going to make a new variable here called count. Instead of doing employees count, we're going to use the entity repository and then count our employee reporting here. It's more accurate, especially when using filters, as you don't know if this employee's data could be modified somewhat. It's the same function, we just want to make sure we're counting from the actual database. So we have our employees and we have our count. What we want to do now is map our model. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually make a new variable called item list. And this is going to be my employees. I'm going to select my employees to a new employee summary info or info summary. And I'm just going to paste over this information here. So just mapping our fields in the model, we're just mapping the fields to the reporting. So now we have our item list and we're not worried that this is going to affect any data inside our table because we're just using a model. So we have our item list. Let's return a new query list result. And let's see what we need. So we need the fetch size. Again, we have the fetch size from our query. So we're going to do our fetch size is query, search criteria, and our fetch size. We need our item list. Our item list is going to be the model that we just created above. We need our offset. Again, we have that in our search criteria. We need our timestamp. Our timestamp is saved as a long, so we're going to just do datetime.now, and we're going to put that to epoch, which is another extension that we have. And our last update, total count is going to be the count that we did above as well. And this is it. This is it for our query handler. This is all the information that we need. Obviously, this is quite a simple example, but there's a lot more logic that you can put into it if you need, and you can return whatever you like for the query result. So this is the good thing about using the model, is that you can adapt the data from multiple different sources. We're only using one source at the moment for our reporting, but maybe you want to combine 4 different tables together and put it into a model. And this is the best way to do this.